Well, it's a blustery November day, and I'm out at Heirloom Roses in St. Paul with Kathleen. And Kathleen, you know, this whole year has been crazy for gardeners, and for roses, it's not any exception for that.
Absolutely not. It was really warm early on, and then we got cold for spring, and then we kind of got warm for summer, and it's really been all over the place. It's actually unusually warm right now. So the roses kind of don't know what season it is, and you can see we've got a lot of new growth on the roses, but we also have a lot of wind, as you can see today, and that causes some interesting problems. So you can see what happens. It was rainy for the last couple of weeks. We're kind of starting to settle into our normal fall weather pattern, but with the rain coming back, you can see things like black spot and rust and powdery mildew are kind of making a comeback, and that's a really good reminder for us that what we do in the fall to put our roses to bed really is going to help us next year in terms of less disease in the garden, because all these things like black spot can actually overwinter as spores on the stem or as debris on the ground. So the more cleanup we can do, the better. And usually we would be doing a little bit more defoliating, and or there would actually be a lot more leaves on the ground at this time of the year, but because it's been so warm, we might not do that as much. But you can see that what happens, especially because the roses defoliate from the ground up, that you end up with kind of these wind sails where the top branches are really top heavy, and if you get these wind gusts, you'll just get branch breakage. So we want to try to thin the rose out a little bit and top it at about chest height, just to get some of the weight off of it, and we want the wind more to be moving through the rose instead of hitting it like the side of a building. And
if it's so warm, it's not going to really hurt it, because we haven't really had a frost yet.
We haven't had a frost yet. Usually this time of the year you can do some light pruning. You don't want to do hard pruning like you do in the spring, because that's going to push a lot of new growth. We don't want that because that's tender. But if you do light pruning, it shouldn't send a signal to the rose to put out a lot of new growth. You might get a little bit like this, but the roses tend to do that anyway. I had growth like this in November last year until we got that hit down to 18 degrees, and they just kind of paused, and then they kept growing when it warmed up after that. So it doesn't hurt them too bad unless we get super cold.
Well, that's good to know. So do you want to do a little pruning on this, and we're going to kind of come back and see it after it's done?
Absolutely.
So Kathleen, you took so much out of this plant, and it's still so windy, but really the wind is going right through this, and it's not going to be damaging it.
Exactly. And one of the things you can do is just kind of step back. It's nice today, it's windy, so you can really look and see, and just watch your rose and how it's moving, and see if there's anything that's really whipping into the other canes. But you can see, really, even though it's windy, we don't have a lot of movement on the plant itself. There's not going to be any rubbing branches where the thorns get each other. And then we've also removed all the not going to open up because it's too wet anyway blooms. The gray mold, also known as botrytis, will come on these buds, and it'll continue down the stem if you're not careful. So it's a good idea just to go ahead and cut all of that off. Now, if you have some blooms that look like they might still open, it's okay to leave those on.
Okay, sure.
That's not a problem. But if it's already kind of, it's also called balling. Go ahead and sacrifice it. It's not going to do anything.
And make sure you don't put it into the compost, into your compost, because it'll disinfect all of your compost.
Any of these diseases, all your rose clippings from this time of the year, they've got black spot on them. Don't put them in your yard debris bin for the municipal garbage to pick up. Go ahead and put it in your trash or burn it. Some people have burn piles.
And then what about spraying? You said to really kind of that it can overwinter all these diseases, so do that later once it's really cold and a frost is coming. Yeah, and when we're talking about spraying at this time of year, we're talking more dormant spray like lime sulfur. It's really tricky to spray at this time of the year. Why it's so important to get the debris up, because it's windy, you can't spray when it's windy, it's rainy, you can't spray when it's wet. So when you are a little bit more dormant in, say, December or January, you can come in with a lime sulfur spray. It's best to go ahead and cut all the leaves off to completely defoliate the bush at that point, and then go ahead and hit the canes with the lime sulfur. And then what about climbers? Because I know a lot of people have climbers, and you want to make sure that those are secured for the wind too.
Exactly. Most of the time at this time of the year, you've had a lot of growth. It's as tall as it's ever going to get, and a lot of times often it's beyond the structure to which you have attempted to train it to. And this is some examples back here of some we've already pruned, but you can see I got some new growth. I need to tie that back up to the posts. This is an example over here where most people have a similar situation where it's flopping beyond the structure. So go ahead and come in with your ties, same thing, just watch it in the wind. If it's blowing around, go ahead and either secure it or thin it a little bit to let the wind go through it.
Wow, well, so much to think about, and really be out in the garden. It's supposed to be, not a bad fall this year, so it's a good time to be out in your garden. If you have any other questions, go to gardentime.tv and we'll click you over Heirloom Roses. Thanks for all the tips, we appreciate it.